On a calm evening, Siwoo decided to shoot his shot with Daein, the queen of love in their class. The attempt backfired faster than a bad TikTok trend, and the air between them thickened with awkwardness. Daein tried to soften the blow by saying she saw him as her bestie, which, in romantic terms, is like getting a participation trophy for a race you didn't run. Aura points plummeting like crypto in a bear market, Siwoo walked away and bumped into his friend Yushin, who didn't need Sherlock-level deduction to figure out what had happened. Siwoo's tear-streaked face told the whole story. After hearing the lame bestie excuse, Yushin was ready to file it under crimes against humanity. A rogue ball rolled Siwoo's way, and he figured it was the perfect chance to earn some aura points. His flashy moves could have humbled even Gorlock the Destroyer, but unfortunately, he still looked like a fried chicken enthusiast who just left an all-you-can-eat buffet. Back home, he stared at his parents' photo, convinced his size wasn't genetic. His father, a wrestling legend, had vanished years ago under the noble pretense of going to get milk. Frustrated with dieting, Siwoo eyed a pack of junk food but somehow lost to the packaging. Later, while jogging, thoughts of his aura debt chased him harder than any fitness goal. That's when a shadowy figure appeared, complimented him, and leapt into his path. It wasn't a priest, but an elderly man named Mangti, local monster boogeyman, who, without much explanation, tossed Siwoo into a sack. When the bag finally opened, Siwoo found himself in a place that was definitely not Earth. Mangti explained this was the spirit world, where once every 666 years, the ancestral ceremony determined the next Yakai king. The old man casually dropped another bomb. Siwoo had goblin blood running through his veins. Before the shock could sink in, a giant, toothy monster dropped from the sky, eager to snack on some premium human in tray. Mangti told Siwoo he could eat the beast if he beat it, a motivational speech only a goblin could appreciate. Unfortunately, the monster sent him flying before he could even process the offer. The fight looked hopeless until something in Siwoo snapped, literally in the monster's arm. Goblin instincts surged, muscles bulked, and in one powerful move he flipped the creature. For the first time that night, the scoreboard read, Siwoo 1, Monster 0. The next morning, Siwoo told Yushin about his spirit world adventure, brushing it off as a dream. Yushin was just glad his friend was having fun, though he couldn't ignore how oddly skilled Siwoo was at wrestling moves he'd never learned. Then, mid-thought, Siwoo was back in the spirit realm. Mangti explained that he'd fallen asleep standing up, something Siwoo swore only a Tacha-level genjutsu could pull off. The same monster from the night before loomed nearby, and Mangti decided to bring over Seolhwa, a sharp-tongued, nine-tailed fox clan member. Seolhwa was unimpressed. In her eyes, Siwoo's win had been pure brute force, no magic, something her grandma could have pulled off mid-nap. Mangti, however, saw potential and declared to all nearby monsters that Siwoo wasn't human but a full-fledged goblin. The revelation meant he couldn't safely return to the human realm without learning to control his powers. Left unchecked, his strength could easily hurt people. Unfortunately, monster re-entry rules weren't Mangti's call. They were set by the Yakai king, whose reign would end in 6 months. When that happened, the floodgates could open, unleashing monsters back into the human world. Siwoo was given 2 options: wait it out or train hard, enter the ancestral ceremony, and maybe even rewrite the laws himself. Mangti promised that with his goblin blood, Siwoo could grow strong enough to protect the people he cared about if he survived the training. Then came the twist. Seolhwa would be his trainer. She immediately protested, knowing the task was nearly impossible. Mangti told her it was either that or wait 6 months. Before she could argue, he vanished into his magic sack, leaving her stuck with the rookie goblin. Not long after, the same monster Siwoo had beaten earlier returned, thinking Mangti's absence meant easy revenge. It underestimated Seolhwa, who, with the authority of a monster royal, bounded in seconds. Lesson of the day. Picking fights with a 9-tailed fox is a bad career move. Siwoo's fear quickly melted into wide-eyed awe at the spectacle he'd just witnessed. Seolhwa explained with casual confidence that it was magic, energy and force molded into power. There were 2 kinds: unique magic, tied to bloodlines like his goblin heritage and requiring no training, and acquired magic, which any monster could learn through sheer grit. She then proceeded to roast the giant-mouthed monster for being magical trash after skipping school, a critique so sharp it nearly sliced the poor creature in half. Agreeing to train him, Seolhwa added a little clause: failed to produce results, and she'd personally send him to the afterlife. She even gave him the chance to walk away, but the determined glint in Siwoo's eyes showed he wasn't backing down. Seol smirked, already certain he'd crash and burn, but willing to entertain his optimism. She suggested they eat, pointing out that using magic consumed monster force, and Siwoo's reserves were practically non-existent. Normally, the spirit realm naturally replenished force, but between his crash diet and last night's battle, his tank was running on fumes. Then it hit. His body went numb, overtaken by an overwhelming hunger, the primal kind that whispered, "Eat or be eaten." Seolhwa explained the only way to recover was to devour the monster he'd defeated. Instinct kicked in, but instead of aiming for the fallen beast, his greedy goblin senses zeroed in on Seolhwa herself. In a sudden blur, he lunged at her. Magic bindings snapped into place around him in an instant, but Seolhwa's shock grew when he shattered them with raw strength alone. Goblins, as she was reminded, were walking cheat codes. Deciding to stop humoring him, Seolhwa unleashed her blood art, summoning the arm of the great demon king and firing a blast powerful enough to remodel the landscape. Siwoo survived, battered but standing. For someone who had just awakened his powers, it was unheard of. Then came the twist. He ripped off his horn, transforming it into a goblin's club radiating raw energy. For the first time, Seolhwa's confident gaze flickered with something new, genuine respect, and just a hint of concern. Seolhwa wasn't just a high-class monster. She was a prodigy, having achieved her 9 tails in a fraction of the 1,000 years it usually took. That's why she knew one misstep could end badly, even with Siwoo nearly drained of force. But before she could land the finishing blow, the atmosphere shifted. Siwoo's aura darkened, electricity sparking like he'd just been handed the season finale's script. He charged, transforming his club mid-sprint into a lightning strike. Seolhwa reacted instantly, summoning the Demon King's arm to intercept, yanking him forward and slamming him into the ground like she was settling a debt. But Siwoo didn't stay down. He resisted the pull, something no one should have been able to do. With a roar, he tore his weapon free and smashed the Demon King's arm, the shockwave rattling the battlefield. Seolhwa summoned a second arm, launching a flurry of strikes, but Siwoo deflected them all. It was then she understood why goblins had such a dangerous reputation. Even seasoned monsters with centuries of training couldn't keep up with this raw power. But power without fuel was a ticking clock. Siwoo's force was nearly gone, his body straining past its limits. Seolhwa sighed, channeling 5 of her tails to summon the upper half of the Demon King. The massive entity slashed, sending Siwoo flying, his aura all but extinguished. Walking over, she told him he was inches from death thanks to his pride, all while mentally bracing for Mangti's inevitable lecture. She turned to leave, but his weak cry for his mother made her pause. Pity, rare and fleeting, crossed her features. Leaning down, she kissed him, transferring magic from her fox bead into his body. Later, Siwoo woke up in Seolhwa's room, alive but groggy. She entered, glaring like she was already regretting her life choices. He, however, couldn't stop grinning, looking for all the world like a man who had just beaten the system. Later that day, Siwoo returned to Seolhwa, apologizing for the reckless outburst earlier. He explained that he had been fully conscious but completely unable to control his body, as if his instincts had slammed the override button and taken the wheel. It wasn't his intention, but his goblin blood had clearly made its own decisions. Seolhwa, however, wasn't in the mood for feelings. Without so much as a nod, she handed him a drink and told him to finish it. Siwoo stared at the cup suspiciously, wondering if this was some strange oriental medicine that had been sitting in the back of an apothecary for 2 centuries. Still, he raised it to his lips. The moment the liquid touched his tongue, regret hit instantly. Whatever it wasn't made for taste buds. He demanded to know what he had just swallowed, but Seolhwa brushed him off, insisting there was no need to know and pressing him to finish it all, the way a mother forces medicine down a reluctant child's throat. Changing the subject without a hint of ceremony, she mentioned that the giant-mouthed monster from before had escaped. However, since the fight had been judged as smooth sailing, the creature was now technically bound to Siwoo. In simpler terms, he was basically the monster's new daddy. Siwoo, still trying to process both the drink and the strange ownership claim, asked if there were other ways to gain monster force without eating other monsters. Seolhwa laughed at the very idea. Monsters were threats to humans. If they had to be devoured to fuel strength, then that was simply how the world worked. but Siwoo wasn't ready to let it go. He pressed for alternatives, and Sialhwa admitted there was one other method, an agreed duel. However, weaker monsters would avoid him now that his goblin bloodline was public knowledge. He wasn't in the rookie league anymore. He'd been dumped straight into the elite server, where only the stronger monsters roamed. Since the giant-mouthed beast had slipped away, Sialhwa revealed she had another plan. She had prepared a present for him waiting just outside her room. Stepping out, Siwoo spotted the so-called gift, a restrained monster, and instantly knew he'd been scammed. This was no present. It was a nightmare waiting to happen. Sialhwa explained that some monsters, just like Siwoo had almost done earlier, lost themselves entirely to instinct. When that happened, they were no longer considered proper monsters. They became little more than beasts, stripped of all rights and dignity, and labeled as shudderwocks from her perch high above on a rooftop. Sialhwa watched with casual interest, as though tuning in to a new Netflix release, while Siwoo tried to figure out what he was looking at. His hesitation didn't last long because the shudderwock broke free. It lunged straight at him, and Siwoo narrowly dodged the first attack. Sialhwa half expected him to freeze in place and get flattened, but to her surprise, he continued evading each strike. This particular shudderwock had once been infamous for its greed, capturing and devouring other monsters to boost its force far beyond its limit. That hunger had driven it into madness, transforming it into the berserk creature now bearing down on Siwoo. All of that unnatural strength was focused on tearing him apart. But Sialhwa quickly realized another problem. Siwoo still couldn't consciously summon his goblin club. His monster force control was abysmal. The shudderwock was faster, stronger, and relentless. Physically, Siwoo was at a disadvantage, and yet Sialhwa also knew that true instinct awakens only when a person is staring death in the face. Just then, Siwoo shifted into a stance that made her pause. It wasn't random panic flailing, it was deliberate. His fist flew forward, and with surprising precision, he landed a clean punch on the shudderwock. The truth was, Siwoo had once tried boxing. His coach had even joked that he might rise to KSI-level fame. But Siwoo hadn't cared about fame. All he wanted was to lose weight. After some persuasion, he trained seriously, and though his obsession with weight loss had driven him through 16 different sports, 7 of them combat sports, the results never touched the scale. He never lost the weight. But the goblin blood running through him preserved all those skills, etching them into his body. Now, in the present, every bit of that training returned at once. Siwoo unleashed a flurry of strikes, flowing from sport to sport, chaining years of combat attempts into one relentless storm. The shudderwock staggered, unable to keep up. Blow after blow landed until finally the beast collapsed to the ground, defeated. Panting heavily, Siwoo stood over it. Victory was his, but his triumph came with a new, very awkward question. How in the world was he supposed to eat it? The shudderwock's massive body lay sprawled on the ground, still and quiet. Dust swirled lazily in the air around it, settling on the battlefield like the curtain had just fallen on some grim theatrical performance. Sialhwa's eyes narrowed as she studied Siwoo. She wasn't watching the monster, no, her attention was fixed on him, as if trying to piece together a puzzle where half the pieces didn't belong in the box. She wondered if that was martial arts, and yet somehow this kid, barely breaking in his new monster body, had just pulled it off. Either fate was playing favorites, or he had a bucket load of plot armor tucked in his back pocket. Her thoughts were cut short when Siwoo, chest puffed up like a man fresh from winning a street brawl, flexed something. It wasn't clear if he had a W to flex, but the confidence was there. He asked what came next, clearly expecting a pat on the back and maybe a parade in his honor. Sialhwa, biting back a laugh, simply told him she'd be happy to chat once he actually won. The words barely left her mouth when the defeated shudderwock proved it had been playing possum. With a sudden, gut-churning lunge, it clamped its jaws onto Siwoo's shoulder. Flesh tore away in a spray of red, the sound disturbingly similar to biting into overripe fruit. For a frozen second, Siwoo just stared, eyes wide, expression somewhere between disbelief and pure existential crisis. There was a piece of him missing, literally, and the mental math wasn't adding up. Pain screamed through his nerves, but it wasn't the sharpness that hit hardest. It was the sight, the knowledge that part of him was gone. Humans feared injury not just for the hurt, Sialhwa realized as she watched, but for the primal terror of losing pieces of themselves. Before he could process it, the shudderwock followed up with a brutal uppercut. It landed with enough force to send Siwoo flying through the air in a perfect arc, like a very unlucky firework. Sialwa didn't move to help. She just stood there, equal parts exasperated and fascinated, wondering why he hadn't dodged when he had the time. Then something strange happened. Right before her eyes, Siwoo's shoulder began to knit itself back together. The ragged flesh smoothed over, muscle filled in, skin sealed shut, the wound gone in seconds. His eyes widened, disbelief shifting into something else. The Shudderwock swiped at him again, claws like hooked blades, but this time the gash that opened across his side closed before the blood even had a chance to fall. Confidence flooded him, hot and bright. The panic bled away, replaced by a spark of something dangerous. The next slash came, and he dodged it cleanly, moving with an ease that made it clear his mind had already shifted gears. This wasn't survival anymore, this was a fight. He planted his feet, pulled his arm back, and felt energy coil in his muscles like a live wire. In a crack of motion, lightning flared around his fist. The strike connected squarely with the Shudderwock's jaw, the sound a cross between a thunderclap and a car crash. The beast went flying, slamming into the far end of the field. Siwoo's arm throbbed like he'd just punched the side of a semi-truck, but the rush of victory numbed it. Still, he wasn't naive. Monsters like this didn't just stay down, they healed too. He kept his guard up, expecting another lunge. Instead, Sialwa approached, telling him the last blow had done real damage. The Shudderwock wouldn't be bouncing back anytime soon. She then asked how it felt to use magic while staying in control of his body. Magic? Siwoo blinked, confused. He hadn't consciously used anything except his fists and willpower. Sialwa told him to cool it. Yes, his regeneration was magic. And that last punch? A blend of magic and physical strength. Did he feel anything unusual? He admitted there'd been a strange electric shock sensation. Sialwa nodded. Yep, magic. She explained she'd forced this fight specifically to awaken it in him. The compliment she gave was rare enough to make him pause. Then, with a lazy wave of her hand, she dragged the Shudderwock's limp body across the dirt with telekinesis. It was time to finish it. Siwoo said he was ready, but she wasn't convinced. Killing for the first time was never easy. Hesitate, and the beast could get one last desperate strike in. She pointed to its upper belly, the location of the magic core, the magic bead. Strike clean, she told him. First tries are always the hardest. He gritted his teeth, steadied his breath, and drove the blade home. The Shudderwock stilled. It was over. Sialwa told him to grab the magic bead, swallow it, and the beast's magic would become his own. Without hesitation, he downed it like a shot of bad whiskey. He waited for the dramatic rush of power, only for a bird to land on his shoulder. Then the bird spoke. Siwoo yelped, tripping over himself, just as the bird transformed into a woman. Sialwa sighed like she'd been expecting this. The newcomer introduced herself as Salmi, a friend of Sialwa's, part-timer for Mangti, and apparently already on a mission to make Siwoo's brain short-circuit. After a quick exchange and a whole lot of teasing from Salmi, she offered Siwoo a choice for his reward. Go home or take the first step toward becoming a stronger monster.